the Raising the Bar podcast, brought to you by the Association of Gray's Inn Students.
Welcome to the Raising the Bar podcast, where we speak with students, barristers, King's Counsel and judges from Gray's Inn about their journeys to the bar, with the aim of supporting students and aspiring barristers. This year, Raising the Bar recognises the anniversary of 100 years of women at the bar and shines a light on stories of impact, change and leadership in all its forms. I'm your host for Season 5, Nora Nanayakara, a student member of Gray's Inn and a Baroness Hale Scholar. I hope our conversation and guests' advice help you on your journey to the bar, to explore how Gray's Inn can help you to achieve your potential. Today we're recording an episode for career changers, and my guest is barrister Nicola Sully, who practices at Westgate Chambers in Brighton in common law. As some of you will know, I too am a career changer, so I'm especially pleased to welcome Nicola today, as a move to the bar as a second career is very close to my heart. Welcome, Nicola. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. As you said, I'm Nicola and I'm based at Westgate Chambers in Brighton, currently predominantly practicing in crime with some family and a little bit of civil.
Lovely. Thank you. So, will you tell us what your first career was and what you did before you made the big move to the bar?
So I started my career journey some 20 odd years ago, and I was initially a primary school teacher. However, I moved to Scotland, and that forced a first career change where I went into the third sector, but I continued to work with families through charities, and I was basically project managing charities and the projects that they ran.
And what prompted you to think about retraining as a barrister?
Whilst I was supporting the families, there were lots of different issues going on which involved lawyers, often in multi-agency meetings where there was advice being given in terms of legal approaches. And so I saw from the other side of the table an area that I was really interested in, and thought, well, I'm quite interested in becoming a lawyer and becoming involved in that side of things. And as I worked through the different projects and had more and more involvement, I knew that was what I wanted to do. Initially, I thought I would go down the solicitor's route. So I applied to study at Robert Gordon University part-time whilst I still worked part-time. And I completed a law degree in Scotland to start with.
And at that stage, did you not give becoming a barrister any consideration, or was it a conscious choice to train as a solicitor?
At that stage, I didn't consider being a barrister. All the interactions I had been with solicitors. So I was inspired by those people that I'd seen at work. I considered the solicitor route. I managed to secure a traineeship while studying part-time, so I was due to finish my law degree and start a traineeship. But life never works out quite as simply as that.
How exciting. So when it came to the moment when your traineeship was due to begin, what happened?
My husband's work moved us from Scotland to England. So I was faced with the fact that I had just studied a Scots law degree for 2 years, and we were now moving to England, and it wasn't going to be worth the paper it was written on.
Oh, the best laid plans, Nicola.
I know. So I was prepared not to be defeated, and I decided to take on an online master's so that I could convert to English law. And I did an online master's with the University of Law. And whilst I was there, I became involved in mooting through the University of Law and through other programs, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was then that I decided, actually, I really just wanted to be a barrister. I'm thoroughly impressed with what solicitors do, hold a lot of respect for the work and the client care that they have, but I really enjoyed the excitement of court, and it was the cherry that I wanted to bite off. So.
And had you had any experience of mooting before going to University of Law?
I had some at Robert Gordon University. I'd entered one competition, so that had kind of sparked the thought process. But when I came down to England and was involved with the University of Law, there were lots more opportunities. So I got heavily involved with the mooting then.
That's great. I really recognise that. So when I was doing the GDL, also at University of Law, as it happens, I was doing it online, and there weren't really the same opportunities for getting together with people to moot. But I had met some people through the Inn, so started doing that. But it was a Gray's Inn University Advocacy Day in 2021 that I attended, and they held a mock trial. And it sounds like that was also the same for you.
Very much so. I really enjoyed pulling all the threads of a problem together and being able to relay it to the people listening in court to explain why the perspective I was trying to put across was the correct one. Of course, you don't always win, but it's nice when you are able to persuade people to see your point of view and to see how the evidence drawn together with the legal argument. And that was really made me excited.
That's great. So that was the point at which you then decided to go on to the bar course, was it?
So I was rather nervous as a career changer. I had read all the statistics that, for example, only 3 in 10 will pass the bar course if they were a mature student. I didn't have any financial backing other than my own. My considerations were after the scholarship rounds had all closed. So I had to make a really difficult decision as to whether I was going to take money out of my mortgage to be able to fund my way through the bar course. And that was a big financial commitment to do that. So I set myself a challenge. I decided I would apply for pupillage rounds. And I said, if I get one interview, I will go on the bar course. If not, I will continue on the traineeship for the solicitor route. So I applied to 10 pupillage providers and I got one interview.
Oh, you got the one. That's brilliant. So now your hand was forced.
So now my hand was forced. It gave me enough confidence to know that if I could get one at the stage that I was at, I was positive that I would get perhaps more when I was developed through the bar course. So I had rolled the dice and then convinced myself marginally. I was still always worried, but I decided that I would go for it. If I could get it on that, then I would move on and try the bar course.
You just need that one sign, don't you, that it might be okay to shift the dial from I can't do this to maybe I just can do this.
Yes.
And for me, it was getting one of the scholarships from Gray's Inn. I thought if they would back me, maybe it is possible after all. But the statistics aren't all that encouraging at that stage, are they?
No, they're not encouraging at all. And it is a big risk. And as a career changer, although I had been successful in my career before, I felt like a fish out of water in the legal sector. It was a whole new area, and you are suddenly surrounded by people who are academically brilliant, very confident, very polished in comparison to myself. And I was well aware of the age gap and the fact that there were going to be views on the fact that I was an older person coming into law. And you have lots of doubts that kind of resonate round your mind, causing you to question whether it really is for you. And I would say to anyone who's considering it, those doubts are perfectly normal. And if you don't have those doubts, then you are possibly too overconfident at that stage. It's helpful to have those doubts, because what it made me do was reflect on what I had to do to be able to prove myself to those that were recruiting. And I reached out for help. I took help from the employability service at University of Law. I came to Gray's and spoke to people here. I had mentoring, and that really helped shape me and the applications that I put forward. So those doubts were fruitful because I questioned what I needed to do.
Because you're a woman of action, though, Nicola. You didn't just dwell on the doubts. You went off and did something about them. I think that that's terrific. I have a mentor at Grays as well, and I have found it absolutely invaluable for those wobbly moments where I've had a bad week or a knockback. And I found it really useful to be able to talk it through with people. And I found the employability service at University of Law amazing. In particular, there's an advisor who specialises in people coming to the bar. And she just seemed to have this Aladdin's cave of tips and tricks and advice and intel that she has gathered through, her amazing network. And she was so generous with that and so supportive that it helped me with my scholarship applications here, which I don't think I would otherwise have had a hope of getting. So that was really helpful.
Absolutely. With that, what you find as well is, as somebody who had been involved in recruitment in other sectors, and also obviously been through a lot of recruitment myself, the one thing I hadn't appreciated as a career changer was how different legal recruitment is, and how the format of a basic CV is changed so significantly compared to the CVs that I used to deal with through the recruitment in the projects that I worked in. They're structured in such a way that you really have to rethink everything that you thought you knew about recruitment as a career changer. And that's one of the really helpful tips, that if you can find somebody that's willing to share that kind of format with you, be it an employability service at a university, or be it a friend that you know, or somebody you meet through Gray's Inn, it really helps when you have to come to these applications and you're thinking about what you need to show to those that are recruiting.
So did you have any trouble articulating the transferable skills that you had from the work you'd been doing in your applications to come to the bar?
First of all, I had to think about the language and how that had to be changed so that it was explained to people that weren't in the industry. But also, I had to consider how to be so much more concise. So the previous industries that I was in, it was very warm and personal, lots of storytelling through the applications that you made. You often had personal statements that were very woolly in comparison. And all of a sudden in law, they're just like, no, just get down to the business. Just tell us very simply, tell us what it was you did. Tell us how it applies to the legal practice, and tell us how you learned from each role that you've taken on. And so when I structured my applications and my CVs, I looked at only the relevant skills, not everything. So there was much that I didn't need to include. Anything that I did with web design, for example, that was out of the door. But my client skills and the project management, dealing with problems as they came up, the problem-solving skills, being able to deal with conflict, all of those things are very transferable into law, but they don't need to know that I've written a database. That wasn't relevant. So it was thinking carefully about what skills were relevant, and if there were any that would perhaps provide an extra star, so to speak, but only if it really would provide an advantage, and not just for the sake of putting it. My first attempts were putting everything, and then I had to cut down and just think, no, really, what do I need to focus on? That was the key.
I did exactly that the first time round. And then when my mentor read through last year's application, I think the experience section was, 9 pages long, because I had just dumped everything from LinkedIn essentially onto this page. And she said, you'll have to remember that barristers reading this are coming at it after a long day at court, and they have 100 of them to read. They are not going to go through 9 pages of waffle about account management. You're going to have to trim it right down, but it just feels like such an impossible task.
I was looking at 20 years worth of career, and how could I get that onto 2 pages?
Yeah.
And the initial time, the first time I sat down, I thought, I'm just never going to cut it down. But I did. I just learned to focus really on those key skills. And one thing that I did do was I made sure each role demonstrated different key skills rather than repeating them. I didn't mention part of the role if it just replicated what had already been put before. So even though I did do that within a role, I didn't include it because I'd already covered it. And then that way, everything became more concise. And it was just drilling down to each new development through each role that I took on.
That is great advice. The other issue that I think career changers, certainly I've faced, is balancing wanting to show them all the great transferable skills that I have because of the wonderful career I've had previously, but balancing that with demonstrating that actually I am quite willing to start again from scratch. I'm not going to have a problem taking instructions. I'm really happy to be the most junior person in the room. And I do think that career changers have to work quite hard to strike that balance. Has that been something you encountered?
Absolutely, yes. I have had an interview before where they said, let's address the elephant in the room.
Words you never want to hear.
You are relatively old to be coming into this process, which of course I just smiled and said, don't you mean experienced?
What a great response.
The thing is, it doesn't matter what industry you are in. If you are changing careers, people are going to question why. And I think the really key thing is to simply be honest about your motivations. Why are you changing career? What has inspired you? Why do you want to do it? Who have you seen? How do you know for sure that you want to be in the legal sector? Saying that you have just had an idea that you would be a good lawyer is not good enough. You have to demonstrate that you've gone and tried it. Have you done a mini pupillage? Yes, you might think you're too old to go and do a work experience, but the only way you can prove to everybody else that you're really interested is you've actually gone and done it. So if you do a mini pupillage, or you go and do a traineeship vacation scheme and say, well, I tried it, but it wasn't what interested me. If you go and get involved in mooting or in mock trials, then you can really talk about why you're interested in it. And then that way you're convincing people that you're committed to a change rather than just having an idea and bobbing along with it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's about demonstrating that you're willing to do those things, because it is confronting going to a moot or being the world's oldest work experience kid at a chambers on Monday morning. I have to say, I've always had really positive experiences at mini pupillages, and it has been largely the thoughts in my own head that have been the biggest barriers on the first day, worrying about what they're going to think of me or how they're going to react. And they've always been nothing but kind and lovely and very interested in what has prompted my interest in what they do, which has been great. So I think I'd also really encourage anyone thinking about it to not be put off by the thought of putting yourself out there.
Absolutely. And I would agree. If you look at other people's profiles, there's lots of chambers that have all the profiles, all the barristers up. You often see career changers on chambers sets. So don't be put off by being a career changer. In fact, it's more common than you think, and everybody is very welcoming. Yes, you might get challenged, but often that challenge is to see if you can face some of the prejudice that you might have to face in the long run. So it's not necessarily actually an insult to you. It's a test to see whether you can cope with the prejudice you might face.
That's really encouraging. And I imagine also for clients, do you find that they respond well to having, so even though somebody might be a junior barrister, I suspect a client might find it very reassuring that someone has been through life and sees that things aren't always...
Absolutely. There's lots of things that you can bring to the table in terms of experience that can help reassure a client. And sometimes just the fact that you are older, the bias works in your favour.
Yeah.
Firstly, they assume that you're very experienced. And secondly, they take comfort in the fact that you're actually leading the way. There is an assumption that if you are older, that you do have experience, which is a comfort to the client. Obviously, you can't mislead them.
No.
But your experience comes from other ways.
I think that's great. So I was wondering then about other biases or assumptions that crop up at work as a career changer, and any strategies or tips you have for addressing them. So one thing that has been shared with me as a concern is that a Chambers is worried about the investment in a career changer. Perhaps there's a concern that they've changed career before, this is just the next thing, and they'll be off in 10 years to try something else. So I wondered if you had any tips or advice for overcoming that assumption or any others.
Well, the first thing with any assumption is to challenge it. So if somebody says, well, are you going to change career? You have to address the fact that actually a third of the female bar leave by the time they're 30. So that assumption, to apply it to the latter end of the age range and not to consider the younger end of the age range, seems bizarre to me. All you can do is explain why this is the career for you, and having been through certain careers before, you will know what you don't want in a career.
So true.
As much as you do what you do want. So that should hold a lot more weight than somebody who doesn't have any experience and has nothing to compare it to. So I would always challenge an assumption, first of all.
And then in terms of fit, that's the other thing that has been raised as a concern, is that when I look at profiles on Chambers websites, I try to imagine myself on that website. And at some Chambers, it's easier than others just because they have a greater range of faces on the screen. Is there anything that career changers should be thinking about in terms of demonstrating professional compatibility or cultural fit with the Chambers?
I'm going to address two things here. The first thing is the idea of fit. I had an advisor tell me once that you should look through all the Chambers sets and look at their faces and see if you fit in. I hated that idea. I really think that you end up with stereotyping, and if you want to push boundaries and create diversity, you shouldn't really be dissuaded from applying just because your face doesn't fit. I think that's very important. So you might have a set that is generally young and you might look much older than everybody else, but that shouldn't put you off completely. But you've got to understand what it is you bring in comparison to other people. So the second thing about professional compatibility is to consider in terms of whether you have what it takes to fit in with the Chambers on a professional level. So forget the face thing, but look at what the junior members have been doing. Are they writing articles? Do you need to have an interest in that? Are they creating podcasts? Do you have an interest in that? Do you need to contribute like that? Do you need to be forging the way in terms of pupillage support? Do you need to be moving forward in terms of networking? What is it other people do? Consider whether there's a gap at those Chambers for a particular skill set and whether they're looking for that gap to be filled, or whether you need to have that skill set to be able to fit in with those Chambers. The only way you'll know whether it's a gap or not is to go and talk to people. So go and network, go to the fairs, go and speak to people at mooting competitions, go and meet people at networking events and message dinners. Go and talk. Find out what it is Chambers want, what kind of skills they're looking for, and find out where you can fit in.
And that's another great skill from past careers, isn't it? Because in other areas, you have to network to get work. And in a sense, it's no different at the bar.
Absolutely. But I want to say it's not networking in the terms get foot in the door. So there is an ideology that everybody who has got pupillage has got so because they know someone in a chamber. That's not the case. That may have been once upon a time, this idea of old boys networks and knowing people to get in. But it's very much not the case from what I see. People now, lots of chambers have different pupillage processes that they follow. There are criteria that are met. It's often marked without the names known or certain background information. So it's not networking to get the foot in the door, it's networking to get information so that you know where to go and where to apply for.
That sounds really sensible. Thank you. And in terms of your current work, can you tell us a little bit about how being a career changer adds value in what you're doing at the moment?
So I'm currently with Westgate. I started with Westgate and my pupillage was predominantly family-based. So all my experience working with children as a teacher and working with different family backgrounds, which involved immigration, alcohol and drug issues, care, domestic violence, that was obviously all key to the pupillage work that I was going to do. And very helpful because it gave me insights into what goes on and an understanding, particularly in care work, as to the pressures that local authorities are already facing and the expectations that you might hold when negotiating what should be going on as part of care plans, for example. So that was very handy to have that insight into the other side of the industry and be able to bring that to the table. Ironically, I have moved from my pupillage from predominantly family now into crime. And the interesting thing is there are a lot of crossovers with the issues. For example, I see a lot of addiction. I see lots of homelessness. I see people that have got learning difficulties and mental health issues. So there are lots of crossovers. And again, the experience that I had working with those people before comes into play when dealing with clients on the ground now. I have changed predominantly from family to crime. I still do family work, but I really enjoy the pace of the criminal practice. Family is better paid. There's no denying that. Many people will be well aware of the strikes that have gone on in the criminal bar and the worries, but I can say that there is plenty of work in the criminal bar. There is enough work to see you comfortable financially, and as you become more experienced, you can be on a good wage.
And it is, and I know everybody will argue their own beliefs on this, but it is sort of where the magic is at, I think, for a lot of aspiring barristers, which we're all trying to establish whether or not it's something that we could do.
It's very hard. It shouldn't be underestimated. There's a high pressure in the criminal bar. You have to be able to juggle very short notice. There can be large cases to read with very little time. And you can even walk into court and be given bundles on the day. But what I find is despite that pressure, there's a huge sense of satisfaction through working through those cases and supporting those clients. And I do both defence and prosecution work. They're very varied and they're very different. And the skills that I bring to my prosecution work is the case management, because there's lots of liaisons with the reviewing lawyer, working with the police to ensure that evidence is there. And then on the defence side is very much working with the client, trying to find their background stories, their motivations, working out what can be pleaded and what can't on their behalf, and just exploring how the best result can be had for the client.
And I imagine that the resilience that you developed all through your career and indeed during the changeover to the bar stands you in good stead with the work you're currently doing. Would that be right?
I think if you can survive pupillage rounds, you've got enough resilience to continue on to the bar. Yes, absolutely. You learn to carry more through experience of work. So the more years of work that you have, obviously, the more you're used to juggling. And by the time you get to the bar, you're phased by very little, I think. I do feel more confident in the workload that I carry and less stressed about what I do because I'm used to managing that kind of workload anyway.
Mm. And I'm now at the $1 million question, Nicola, as to, are you glad that you changed career, and has life at the bar met the expectations that you had when you fell in love with it while mooting all those years ago?
Absolutely. I thoroughly enjoy it. In fact, I work harder and longer than I have ever done before, but every night I know I wouldn't want to do anything else.
That is just the best note to end any podcast on that I could possibly imagine. Nicola, thank you so much for your time and advice. So, Nicola, before I let you go, are there any particular resources or websites that you think career changers could usefully be looking at?
I used several. The first was lawcareers.net. That was really useful for reading up about the information on different chambers. Of course, you also had the Legal 500, which was useful for that same purpose, reading about what the chambers did and who was involved and who had awards. Then I also followed a group called the O-Shaped Lawyer. They are, in fact, a group of lawyers that are trying to improve the different kinds of transferable skills and work experiences that are involved in the legal sector. So there is a push there for greater skills. So that is something I would recommend. And of course, you have Gray's Inn itself. That was a great help. Being able to speak to the education department, they often know who to connect you to if you do need further help. And I also used the University of Law website. There was lots of little pages that had springboards to other podcasts or articles that you could read. And the final one is LinkedIn. I followed lots of lawyers, and particularly barristers, on LinkedIn and followed their journeys. I was particularly interested in following the pupils so that I could see how their journey progressed and whether they were welcoming of career changes.
That's great. Thanks for those excellent tips. Nicola, thanks very much for joining us. Really grateful to you for taking time out of your busy practice.
Thank you.
Be sure to catch the next episode about life at Gray's Inn, where there will be more tips and advice for aspiring scholars and students. Look forward to catching up next time.
Thanks for listening to the Raising the Bar podcast. Please follow, rate and review on your podcast app. And for more information, check us out on Twitter at AGI Students.